Hey everyone, welcome back to the next installment of the Tarantula, my 1967 Triumph T100C desert sled build. We all need another desert sled, don't we? You might notice something that looks kind of like a motorcycle in front of me. This whole episode is about getting the wheels done, getting the swing arm rebuilt, getting that motor back in. Hopefully you enjoy it. Thanks for watching. Alright, here's the front wheel. It's got the nice shouldered aluminum rim and the Rickman hub. And I'm not sure what these bearings are. I'll have to take them out and measure them. But this one feels pretty rough. Pretty rough. And then the back wheel has this old Circle Industries overlay sprocket on it. And it's, not got too much life left on it, but enough to play with it for a little bit. These are becoming pretty hard to find unless you can just pick them up cheap at a swap meet or something. But I know a company here in the States makes them, and Ace Classics is now remanufacturing them. But they're still like $150 a pop, which is crazy. So this one just uses a standard Triumph bearing, and those are easy to get as well. So I'll just replace these while I'm replacing the other ones. To get that speedometer side bearing out, you actually need to remove this outer ring. So this is a left-hand thread, which means when you tighten it, you turn it to the left. So to loosen it, you turn it to the right. That one's pretty loose. Unfortunately, these dust seals are actually the grease retaining rings. They get destroyed when you remove the bearing. Check it out! The wheels are all cleaned up, and I've also got my new tires. So I went with a Tusk 110-100 for the rear. It's approximately a 18 by 4.5, and then I went with an old Avon Trail Supreme that's in really good condition that I've had for a while. Again, trying to save a little money, so use what I have. I cleaned this all up and conditioned it really well. I did my best to try to match the tread patterns that were on the bike to begin with, so I think they came out pretty good. I'm going to take these to go get mounted right now. I'm back from Phoenix's own Moto Tire. I got my new tires on, new rim strips, and new tubes. Alright, let's start with the rear wheel. I've got all my parts and pieces laid out. Now, when I took this wheel apart, the bearings out the first time, it destroyed some of the retainers. I luckily had some replacements in my spares. So the whole purpose of these retainers is basically to keep the grease inside the old open bearings, but the new bearings are sealed. They're also exactly the same size as the old bearings. So although these are no longer holding the grease in, they are serving a purpose because they're distancing the bearing into the correct location. So you still need these. Now, one exception I'm making is on the timing side. There is a grease retainer that has a very small ledge, and that actually goes inside the bearing right there and keeps the grease in. I think it's perfectly acceptable to replace it with the same style bearing, retainer ring that's on the other side. They don't have that little ledge on the inside. You're no longer needing to hold grease in, but you do need the distance. It gets a little confusing, so I made myself a little chart here, and I'll put this in the description. You can download it, make your life a little easier. But it shows you what specific spacer, retainer ring, whatever you want to call them, goes where. At least on a normal style rear brake hub. If you have the quick detachable hub, it's slightly different, so look at your parts book. Everything is nice and clean, and I wire wheeled all the rusty steel parts and put some more of this rust inhibitor on. I tell ya, if you like to clean things, you will love working on old bikes. Hey guys, this next section is going to be about putting new bearings into the rear wheel. And I haven't done this in probably 7 years or so, and I've never followed the shop manual. Well, I decided to follow the shop manual this time and just kind of remind myself, and it is wrong. It wants you to install the bearing from the speedo side first. That's incorrect. You want to install it from the drum side, the drive side first, because that distance is the most important. The way where the bearing seats, and then the spacer, and then the backing plate are very specific on this side. If you install it from the speedo side first, it's going to come in too far and push your backing plate out too far. So again, the manual is wrong. Install from the drum side first. Well, I had a hell of a time. This bearing was just too far out because the distance tube was just too far this direction, which in turn made the spacer for the backing plate out too far, which in turn made the backing plate out too far. I am fairly confident that the instructions are wrong and that the first bearing you should install is the drum side. So this side is driven incorrectly. Now we can put the retainer back on. I tell you, this tool is a piece of junk. The handle cracked. So now you can see that the retainer is almost flush with the outside of the wheel. That's the way it should be. Before, it was out about 1/8 of an inch. To begin, we're going to install the little cupped grease retainer. And what you want to do is get a socket that fits inside the ring there. Then we're going to push it down in. Next, I'm going to install the bearing. I've had this in the freezer. I don't know if it really helps that much, honestly. Just use the appropriate sized socket or a bearing tool if you got one. Because I don't have the right spacer on the speedo side, I'm trying to take this other one and just kind of push it out a little bit. I don't want that middle section to touch the bearing. So I've got it on my press here, pushing a socket down. Let's see if this worked. Kinda. Let's see. I think that's gonna work. This part should be able to screw on the outer part and hold it in, and the middle piece won't touch. That will allow the central speedo spacer to fit in there. I think that's gonna work. But what's the lesson, kids? Try to have the right parts. Alright, back on this side, I'm putting in my modified little spacer here. So remember, I tapped that out. That way it doesn't make contact with the inner part of that bearing. This is the adapter for the speedo drive. It is left-hand thread. So now it makes contact with that washer and allows the bearing to move smoothly. Take your 3/16 inch, get her on. That might be about it. We're still spinning good. We're not going to put this on yet, but we can check for fitment. So this little speedo spacer fits right between the little washer, and that should space out the speedo drive. I think I should probably file some of these down. They're a little sharp. Let me do that real quick. There we go. All right, the last thing to do on the rear wheel is a quick rebuild for the brake plate. So I'm just going to pop these shoes off. I'm going to sand them down to get the glaze off. I'm going to pull out both of the pins here and grease them up, and that's pretty much it. I took a wire wheel to all the parts and put some rust inhibitor on them. I have a replacement spring, which I'm going to probably use. Cleaned up the backing plate and sanded up the brake shoes because they've got a lot of meat on them. Again, everybody, low buck build. I've got some waterproof grease on the pivot bolt here for the shoes. Onto the brake shoes, I've got a handy little chart here. As you can see, they are directional, and as I found them, they were in correctly, so that's good. I sanded them down, and they've got a little bit more bite on them. Plenty of meat, so I'm going to definitely reuse these. Okay, putting on the shoes is pretty easy. We just put our springs on. We want the flat side down here at the pivot. Pull them apart, break them open. There we go. Okay, we're at final assembly of the wheel. We've got all the bearings and everything in. The first thing I want to do is take my speedo drive and get some fresh grease kind of packed in there, because that will be spinning even if you're not using it. Try to pack it in there. Next, I'm going to secure the bearing retainer by using the screw we took out in the very beginning. Okay, onto the rear axle. So there is a longer threaded side and a shorter threaded side. The longer threaded side goes towards the speedo. So what I like to do is, because the speedo can't go past that point right there, I slip it on, put on the washer, and then I get this side started. It's usually going to hang up right here where the frame hits. You can usually charge through it. You might need to put this on a bench vise. So I can never really 100% tell how far to take this. Well, I got really lucky. It went right through there. So I'm going to stop about right there. Then I'm going to put my spacer on. And I'm going to slide her in. I'm going to feel for those notches for the speedo gear. Must be right there. Push it in. I'm not told that that's seated correctly. Okay. Lean it up against something to keep the axle in. I'm going to lightly grease the spacer. I've gone ahead and cleaned out all of this with a wire wheel. While I'm here, I'm going to clean it out a little bit with some more brake cleaner. Still pretty dirty. Okay, I'm going to offer up my backing plate. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. There we go. We're putting on one of the big nuts on this side. This is where it can start to get a little bit more challenging if you can't thread this on. You know, because my other side is so good to thread on, I'm going to pull this out I'm going to take this axle to my bench vise and get it past that difficult spot. It was pretty difficult to get past the threaded section that sits on the frame because it's just slightly boogered up and makes it hard to get that nut through. I would have never got it through. So we're going to kind of reverse this, go back in this way now. So now we got to get to the phase where we got to get both sides equal. So going back to the other side again, put our spacer back in, the speedo drive, the washer, and the nut. Okay, so we're looking for equal thread distance on each side. Alright, this is the easier side to turn, but unfortunately we need to go in just a hair. Luckily we're past the real hard part on this side. So if I just use a piece of whatever, I can see what they look like. And they're pretty much right on the money. So we can tighten those up. Okay. Now we have an entire axle independent of the wheel. Everything's pinching itself together just in the middle of the bearings. It seems like it can be quite a bit of work sometimes when you run into like little roadblocks like the threads. The last thing I'm going to do is just lightly put the adjusters and the axle nuts on just so I don't lose them. Onto the front wheel. Hopefully this is a little easier than the back. I've never done a Rickman wheel, but it seems pretty easy. We're going to start on the drum side. There's already a circlip in here to bottom out the bearing. So I put my nice cold bearing right there. Tab it in. Wipe it out. Take our circlip. Let's get her in. Make sure we're locked in. Next we've got our distance tube inside, and this looks homemade to me. So it also doesn't look straight, and it's got a whole bunch of issues. So I'm going to put this on my lathe really quick and kind of straighten it out. Alright, I cleaned up the distance tube and gave it a little bit of a shoulder for no particular reason. I've already taken some calipers and double checked the thickness of the bearing to see where it's going to land, and we're in a good spot. This side kind of doesn't matter. You can create spacers of whatever you need to go from the bearing to your forks. Oh, there we go. That's where it wants to be. I'm going to stick the axle down there and get that all lined up. There we go. Okay, on to the front hub here. So when I got this bike, this brake plate was on the other side, the timing side, and these fork lowers were flipped so that the drain bolt was pointing up, and this side was on this side and this side was on this side. I've been debating which way I want to go with this. If you run the brake plate on this side, that means the actuator lever is at the top and pulls the cable up. If you run it on this side, the actuator cable is more conventional and pulls it up this direction, which I think I prefer. So I'm going to run it on the left side like this. Also, when I got it, there was like a really janky kind of setup where, well, here it is. He basically just sandwiched these two pieces together, and it was definitely not ideal. So what I think I'm going to do, and I've thought about this quite a bit, is I'm going to actually cut the fork out just above the protrusion here on the brake plate, so this can slide all the way over that direction. Alright, that fork stop has been modified. Now if I look at this, where the wheel is sitting, it is ever so slightly to the right side here, the timing side. So I think what I'm going to do is take about 1 millimeter off the edge of that brake plate right there. And that'll move everything just a little bit over, and I'll be happy. I took some left-right measurements, and this is the distance from the rim to the fork leg. And it's about 5-6 millimeters in there, so somewhere in there, if you split the difference, it's about 2 to 3 millimeters. I'm going to take it slow and take 1 millimeter off at a time and make sure it goes in perfectly. Alright, I'm feeling pretty good about that center location. I probably took about 2.5 millimeters off the end of that brake plate. Now we fit in there really good. Now I got to create the spacer on this side. So I already put the axle on the lathe and kind of smoothed it out so it has absolutely no resistance to make sure we're not pinching the forks together. So I got to figure out the distance between that bearing and the end of the fork here. Oftentimes the best way to do things is just to do it redneck style, and I'm trying to figure out my spacer here, so I just added up a bunch of different thickness of washers until the right thickness was there. I also took just a little bit more off the brake plate. Alright, I think I've got a pretty good solution for the brake stay. It's just a piece of bent folded steel. I think it's 3/16, and just pinches all the parts and pieces together. As usual, the second or third piece you make is usually the best one. This was the temp number 1, and this is temp number 2. So I'm just going to smooth this out and move on. I think the wheel's about done. Alright, there's the piece. It just slides on like this. Screws together. There it is, all metal finished. Fits in there really good. Got my 18 millimeter spacer on that side. Alright, one of the last things I'm going to do to this chassis is I'm going to clean up the swing arm area, remove all these bolts, get all that paint off, lube everything up. And also right here there are some rubber gaiters that kind of protect a spindle right there. So we're going to replace those. So it should be pretty easy. It's this bolt, and this bolt right here, and then I have to remove the shock. So this whole rear end should just come right off. This bolt down here is a standard 5/8. Hard as a rock. This one just disintegrated. Here's the replacement parts, the replacement gaiters. Oh no, I broke it! I'm just going to do the same stuff I always do. Clean everything up, grease it, clean up all the hardware. Probably going to take that fender off too, just to clean that hardware up. And I think I might also paint the frame rail back here. There's been electrical tape where the seat clip goes. I'm going to remove that and paint this all back up. I decided I'm going for a little bit of bling, so I'm going to match that gold Rickman hub. Here's the original color. Close enough, eh? So I'm going to match the springs to the hub and repaint the hub. Just give it a little bling. Fresh out of the oven. Here's my nice freshly baked brake plate. That's hard to say 5 times. I've already put the shoes in, so I spent like, I think at least an hour trying to figure out what type of brake shoes go in this, and I found like an obscure post somewhere that said that Triumph Tiger Cub front and rear brake shoes are the same as they used in the Rickman, so they matched up perfectly, so they look good. Everything's greased, ready. What's nice about these shoes is they're symmetrical, so they're not directional. Now on this side, the actuating lever, I do believe it's been hogged out pretty good. A smart me would fix that, but I think I'm just going to let it go. It's got a little bit of play, as you can see. Maybe I'll fix that eventually, but it's not high on my priority list. Alright, let me get this back on the wheel. Oh, by the way, I finally found my first metric bolt, or nut actually, right there. Connects to the brake pivot. 14 millimeter, I think? Yep. Check it out, looking pretty good. Alright, back to working on the floor. I've got all the rear end hardware cleaned up and rust protected. I've gone ahead and put my waterproof grease in a grease gun. So I think I'm going to pretty much put this back together the way I took it apart. Is I'm going to put the bolts in at the bottom so that it creates a pivot. And then I'm going to raise this whole thing up, put on these bolts, and then finish up with these bolts and these bolts. So the first thing I'm going to do is fill up this whole cavity of the spindle with grease. Then each side gets a little rubber gator. The timing side gets a distance spacer. And the primary side gets a distance ring that actually goes over it. And that goes between this, and that's held together with these big ass bolts. Next, I'm going to line up these bolts on the bottom. Sure glad I don't have to worry about any scratches. That's a good thing about building an off-road bike. You can kind of half-ass everything. So this side gets a ring. I think this is actually supposed to be painted black on the outside. I don't care. I'm going to start with the timing side. The timing side has a Zerk. I flattened out both of these washers. There's a little hole right here. I have a feeling that that's supposed to go in there, and then you bend it over to keep it from moving. Pretty easy. Alright, I'm going to bend this over. I'm going to put this in. Which way should that go? I don't know. Seems right. That one started. So what I'm doing is I'm putting this little weird pigtail on this washer in that hole and bending it over somehow. Okay, everything's still kind of loose. I'm going to put in the upper stud. Okay, now I'm just going to tighten everything up. And these down here, I'm pretty sure are 5/8. Not sure if they've been replaced or not. Just getting them even. All right, everything's back together. I didn't fully tighten these bolts down here because I have a feeling there's going to be a little bit of adjustment to get the foot peg bolt back through there, so I'll probably have to loosen those back up. I also tightened the swing arm bolts, but I didn't put down the lock washers yet. I'm going to ride it a little bit and see if anything loosens up, and then I'll tighten it up one more time, then I'll put the lock washer on. Now I just need to finish putting grease in the swing arm, and then I can move on. All right, now it's time for that last bit of bling. I'm going to put that fender on. 3, 2, 1.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right on. Okay, almost time for that motor. I just need to clean up all the different motor mounts and things, paint them. And we're GTG, baby. Start with the bottom long stud, insert the spacer on one side, take the primary cover off this side, and there's just enough room to fit that other spacer in there. You'll have to kind of rock the motor a little bit to the right, a little bit, lift it up on the left, and just kind of wiggle it around till that stud gets through. I guarantee you it's easier if you take off the guard here, but I was feeling kind of lazy. There's still enough room to get your fingers in from both sides to get that spacer lined up. At this point, it's pretty much just as easy as putting on the front motor plates and the back motor plates. All right, I'm going to get the rest of this motor locked in, and the next video is going to be all about getting the oil tank and the gas tank cleaned out and mounted, the cables on, and getting that electrics kit finally set up and running. Hey everybody, thanks for watching and thanks for sticking around this long. We're so close to getting this thing done. So if you've been following me from the start, I really appreciate it. I love putting this type of stuff out there. Not trying to be famous, I just like documenting stuff like this. Thanks for watching.